afternoon, everyone. My name is Michelle Dexter. For those of you who don't know me, I'm excited to see a few faces that I recognize and a few new names that I'm not as familiar with. So thank you all for joining me this afternoon. I guess we're now into the afternoon. As I said, my name is Michelle Dexter. I'm an attorney here with Keystone Law Firm. I've been here going on almost 9 years now. And Francisco Servent, who's the founder of Keystone Law Firm, and I have been trying to do some different webinars to kind of educate the community. Carmi Gutman is a financial advisor here as well, and so he also does some webinars. And so if you're ever looking for information, our YouTube channel, if you Google search YouTube, Keystone Law Firm, you'll find a lot of good videos on there that hopefully will help people with information that they're looking for. So today's topic is how to fill out the EIN form and obtain that EIN after a trustmaker dies. Keep in mind, while I am an attorney, this is not intended to give specific legal advice to any one of you. Everybody's situation may be slightly different. This is a generally informational and educational purpose webinar. So if you have something tricky that you're dealing with, please reach out to a legal professional, whether you call our office or somebody else, okay? So the first thing we want to evaluate is, do you even need an EIN, okay? For those of you that have your revocable living trusts, you as the trust maker, your social security number is the tax identification number for your trust. We only need an EIN when we are replacing the trust maker's social security number for tax ID purposes, because no trust maker is alive, okay? If you have an irrevocable trust, that may also require an EIN. We do those for long-term care planning. We might need a irrevocable Miller's trust, or we might need a irrevocable special needs trust. Some of those different types of trusts may have their own EIN number, and those would be appropriate times to get that. But if you have your own personal revocable living trust and you are still alive, you should not need an EIN for that trust, all right? So definitely don't do it before the trust makers are deceased with a revocable living trust. All right, just want to kind of clarify that. When we're doing and obtaining an EIN, we can apply for the EIN online. However, there's a couple of documents that I encourage you to review and to have in place. If you are doing or obtaining an EIN for something that you are in charge of or in control of, that your name is on, you don't need to have a separate authorization. But if you are doing it for somebody else, so for example, the law firm gets hired by a trustee, the trust is now irrevocable because the trust makers have passed away, we're getting a new tax identification number or EIN, we will have the trustee sign a document authorizing us here at Keystone Law Firm to apply for that EIN number, okay? So if you're trying to help somebody else out, you need to make sure that you're getting that authorization in writing, and that is something that they require that you keep, and we'll talk about that when we're going through the forms. The SS-4 form is the form that you'll want to be filling out, and again, if you're doing this for a third party, you're going to have them sign that form and you're going to keep it. I think that filling out the SS-4 form, even if you're doing it for yourself, is just a good way to make sure that you know that you have all of the information that you need with regards to what the application is going to be asking for, okay? There are also separate instructions for completing the SS-4. Now, all of these, not the authorization, but the SS-4 and the instructions are available on the IRS's website. So if you go to irs.gov, then they can, you can put in the search bar SS-4 and those documents will come up. Rachel's got a question. Rachel, you'll probably have to put that in the chat. There's a little chat bar towards the bottom right. It looks like kind of like one of those cartoon speaker things, and you can add your question in there if you have a question, all right? All right, so that SS-4 form is the one that you're going to be looking at getting, okay? Let me come back over here. So as I mentioned, the authorization to apply for the SS-4, if you're applying for an EIN for a third party, not yourself, then you're required to have the written authorization from the person for whom you're applying, authorizing you to apply on their behalf. This is specifically asked for, and you're required to keep the record of that, all right? This is what the SS-4 form looks like, all right? And I realize it's a little bit hard to see in this capacity. I've got screenshots of doing it online, but basically, as I mentioned, most of this has the information in it, okay? This is the second page, and it does talk about, do you need an EIN number? And so when are the appropriate times to do that? So again, good information on the irs.gov website. And then, as I mentioned, the instructions are there. This is just a partial screenshot of it. I do go into a little bit more of the responsible party when we get there. But if you're looking for the detailed information from the IRS themselves on how to apply for this EIN and how to fill out the SS-4 form, there are specific directions in the IRS's website. And it's nice because it will identify if you're filling out line number 7B, this is what you need to be filling out, type of thing, okay? The online application for EIN, so use the completed SS-4 form to complete the online application. If you don't have all that information ready, their system may time you out. And if you have to go back to correct information, you may also have to start from the beginning again. So having all that information and kind of knowing what it is that you're going to do, it can be helpful in that regard. Rachel's question is, if there's a joint trust, is an EIN needed when both people die or just the second one? You need it when the second person passes. Okay, so when the first person passes, we're using the survivor social security number for the tax ID number for the trust. But when the second trust maker passes, that is when we need an EIN. Okay, good question. All right. So the online application process for applying for an employer identification number, also known as an EIN. Sometimes you'll hear them referred to also as a TIN, a tax identification number. Generally the same thing. I think the TIN tends to be a little bit more certain business related, but the EIN, you can search this in their site and it comes to this page. And down at that blue button down at the bottom, it says begin application now. When you're ready, that is what you'll move forward to, okay? So the first thing that you're going to do is identify what type of legal structure are you applying for, okay? Today, we're mostly talking about the trusts, but understand that if you are opening up a probate, the estate one is appropriate for probates. The trust one is appropriate for trust administration, okay? You can see that there's also sole proprietor, partnerships, corporations, limited liability, and some additional tax exempt types that are listed there. But what we're looking at today is doing the trust, okay? So when we click on the trust, it's going to want us to identify the type of trust, all right? In most cases, when both of the trust makers have passed away from a revocable living trust, okay, so that's basically the example we're going to be using today, right? You've got a revocable living trust. Both of the trust makers have passed away. We now have to administer their trust for the benefit of the contingency beneficiaries. We are now doing an irrevocable trust, okay? Once both of the trust makers are deceased, even though it was created as a revocable trust, it now becomes irrevocable because neither of the trust makers are able to make any changes anymore to the terms of the trust, okay? So we go and choose that irrevocable trust there on that right-hand column, all right? Once you choose that trust, there's the warning box there that says, what is an irrevocable trust? It confirms that the grantor has no control over the trust, that the trust will be responsible for reporting income. And if you need to change your structure, this is the good time to change it, because going forward, if you have to change anything, you might have to start all over again, all right? So next, we're going to tell them about the responsible party, okay? Now, the responsible party in a probate is the personal representative that's been appointed by the court, okay? When it comes to a trust, here at Keystone, we typically are using the trust maker as the responsible party, okay? I know that some law firms will use the trustee as the responsible party. The reason that we do that is when you go to the instructions from the IRS website on responsible party, the first part says the responsible party is the person who ultimately owns or controls the entity or who exercises ultimate effective control over the entity. And that would sound like the trustee. But if you go to that second box about midway through, it says for trusts, The responsible party is a grantor, owner, or trustor. Okay, so the trust maker in our case is the grantor, the owner, or the trustor. So typically when we are looking at identifying the responsible party, we are using the trust maker. And so that would be whoever was the second to pass if it was a married couple. So it would be the second to pass. And we're putting in their name and their social security number tied to this. Okay. Next is going to say, tell us about the trustee. And that more than likely is going to be you, or the person who is going to be the one effectuating and administrating the trust now that both trust makers have passed away. Okay, so if that is your role, your name will go in there. All right, you'll see at the bottom of there your role. Either you are the grantor, the trustee, or the beneficiary, or a beneficiary having a material interest, in which case you can do this without a third party authorization. That second box says, I'm a third party applying for an EIN on behalf of the trust. That is where, like us here at Keystone, we get authorization from the trustee to do this on their behalf. One thing that you really want to make sure of when you are filling this particular form out, this whole IRS application, they don't like any special characters. So for example, if you would normally do your middle initial as L period, don't put the period. If you're doing your address as, 2701 West, and West being W period, Queen Creek Road period, you don't use the period. So it's kind of interesting, but it will correct you if you're doing that, but just know that as you're going through, no special characters are allowed. If you indicate that you're a third party designee, then it was going to ask you, are you a third party designee? And it's kind of verifying. Did you get authorization from the taxpayer and complete a signed SS-4 form? So remember, that was one of those first forms that I showed you from the IRS website, that you're going to have an authorization signed and the SS-4 application signed as well. So you have both of those documents, and you as the third party designee are required to keep that documentation. So make sure that you don't, once you have the EIN, don't just throw it away or anything. You actually need to hold on to that, okay? If you're a third party designee. If you're doing it for yourself, this does not apply. Okay, then the addresses. So what is the address for the irrevocable trust going to be? At this point in time, right, even though the trust maker is the responsible party, the address is usually going to the trustee. Okay, you want where we want the IRS to send information, where do we want anything related to the tax IDs sent to. So that's generally is going to be the trustees' contact information at that point in time. Okay, so street, city, the state, the zip code, what country you're in, and a phone number. Okay, if you have a different US address than what's above, so let's say that this is the mailing address that you're using and you've got a different home address, you can put in the different address for that. Okay. Next is going to be, tell us about the irrevocable trust. Okay, so the legal name of the irrevocable trust is going to be put in there, keeping in mind no special characters. Okay, the county and where the irrevocable trust is located. So you as trustee may be out of state, but if the trust was done here in Maricopa County and this is where the trust makers lived and this is where the real property is, I'm putting that the county where the irrevocable trust is located is in Maricopa County, Arizona. Okay, and so you can just say Maricopa. The next option is what state it is. Now, the date the trust is funded. Okay, the trust has the original, in the name of the trust, it has the original date that the trust makers first made the trust. Okay, however, the date that the irrevocable trust was funded is the date of the second trust maker to die. Okay, and so that's really important, because if you have a trust that's, say, 20 years old and you try to use the date of that trust was originally created, the IRS will reject it. Okay, I'm not sure how far past. I think we've got one right now that it hadn't been administered in 5 years since the trust maker died, that we're about to find out whether or not that EIN is going to be able to be something that we can populate through the online process, or if that's something that we're going to have to send directly to the IRS and wait a couple of months to get an EIN number. And so that really stinks. So for most of you, if you can get the EIN number within, a few months of the second trust maker to die or the only trust maker to die, that's the best way to do it. And you're using the month and year that that person passed away as the date that that irrevocable trust is funded. Okay. There are times that there may be character limits in the legal name of that irrevocable trust, and you might have to abbreviate. In our certificates of trust, under the trust name, the next paragraph kind of talks about how you can abbreviate the name of the trust a little bit and still make it be what they need for a legal termination. So just know that you might have to abbreviate that a little bit, but you're looking for the legal name of the trust, which is the original name of the trust, unless you're creating sub-trusts or doing something fancy, which is a whole different conversation. For today's purposes, again, we're just converting that revocable trust into an irrevocable trust because both of the trust makers have passed away. Okay. Then there at the bottom, do you expect to have any employees in the next 12 months? Most trust administrations don't have any employees, so that usually is not an issue. Okay, so use the county where the assets are, where the trust maker last resided. Don't use the original funding or the original date of the trust. Use the date of the last trust maker to die. Okay. Now, when you get to this point, you've put in all the information and it's going to give you a summary. Okay, down towards the bottom of this page is the summary information. That's a good time for you to review everything and confirm that everything is accurate. It's also important that you print that page, whether you're just saving it as a PDF or printing or whatever, but you want to make sure that you have all the information as to what you put into the system on file, because you won't ever necessarily get something again that provides you with all of that information. Okay. They'll provide you with the EIN, but they won't provide you with who did you put in as the responsible party and what social security number did you use and those types of things. So definitely we encourage you to print the summary of information before you click that next button to finalize and submit for the EIN number. Okay. Now, as I was preparing for this one, typically it did not give us an option as to whether or not we get a letter digitally. Historically, what it would do is it would provide us with the number, and then everybody would get a letter, you know, a month later in the mail from the IRS. And so I always tried to warn people, hey, you're going to get a letter from the IRS, because I know when I get a letter from the IRS, it makes my heart stop a little bit. So I always like that warning. They're just sending you the copy of the information that somebody obtained an EIN. And so that's all that is. It looks like now they've got it so that you can either receive the letter digitally or receive it by mail. And so whichever one you prefer is fine. Either way, once you submit, they're going to provide you with that EIN number. And again, you're going to want to print that page to have that information. So the EIN number is what you will use for future tax returns for the trust. Okay. Anytime you open up a new account for the trust, that's going to require that EIN number is replacing that trust maker's social security number, so that all of the future income and taxable transactions can come through this new tax ID number and not be tied to a trust maker who has passed away. Okay, so it is important to have an EIN when you need it. It's important that the accounts are updated and created in a way so that is utilizing the EIN properly. But you don't always have to file a tax return for a trust administration, but you're probably going to need that EIN just to get the accounts converted and to give that to the different companies who are going to want to know where do they report any of the taxable income to. Okay. So online application process, you can submit your EIN request and receive the EIN immediately. Make sure you keep the paperwork in case you run into any issue. Getting a hold of the IRS after the fact can be really difficult. You can fax them some information, but it's really hard when we have, you know, maybe two people have applied for an EIN number for the same thing, and now we've got competing things. To get some of that cleared up with the IRS can be difficult. You want to make sure that you're documenting any communication with them and keeping good records in terms of, you know, certified mail to confirm that they should have received it and those types of things. Okay, so make sure that you're keeping all the paperwork in case you run into any issue. Keep in mind that issues can arise when the responsible party and or the trustee is not a U.S. citizen or does not have a social security number. So that's one of those things where, again, you can't do it online. You're going to have to submit that all directly to the IRS, and it's going to take a bit of time to get that information back. So just know that if you are considering naming somebody who's out of country and is not a U.S. citizen to administer your trust after you're gone, it could cause some delays in their ability to manage some of the assets. Okay. And then finally, know that issues arise when the trust funded date is years old. I don't have an exact number of how many years we've run into problems with some of that in the past for, but I know that you want to use that date of death of that second person as the trust funded date, because technically that is when it converted from a revocable trust to an irrevocable trust. And so it's really important that we're using the correct date on that, which is the date of that last trust maker to die. And so that is really a key part to being successful in this application process. So, I thank you all for attending this. When we talked about doing it, I know we get a lot of questions about completing forms for an EIN, and I thought this is pretty boring, but a lot of people seem to have interest in it, so I definitely wanted to do it, and I'm glad that we did. It looks like Susan's got, well, first of all, Alexis has included information about our next upcoming webinar. So if you're interested in that, please take a look in the chat box and you'll see the registration links. We do value education here. So in addition to our webinars, Francisco also does our intentional living summits for our trust care members. So if you should be seeing information for that upcoming one in September, but you'll also see those upcoming webinars, one about intro to wills and trust, and another one about we're about to retire with 1.5 million in rental properties and investments. What should my estate plan look like? So register for those if you're interested. So Susan asked, would you get an EIN immediately if you put the wrong date that the trust was funded? How do you fix it? So if you need to fix that, that's when you're going to have to mail that to the IRS and give them notification to update that date. And that's the best thing that you can do. So if you already got the EIN, but you put the wrong date in it, send them a letter saying you inadvertently put the wrong date that trust was funded. And like I said, I would keep documentation to show that you sent it and that they received it. I don't know what they do on their end with it. I don't think it will ultimately change your EIN number, but you can at least be on record that you gave them notification of it. And if they fail to do something with it, then that's on them, not on you. Good question, Susan. I know a lot of people, they feel like once that's the first step, and so they'll rush into getting it. And sometimes I've heard financial advisors will get it for people. And, I do worry a little bit that people are jumping ahead of themselves and trying to fill out things that they're not really sure what they're filling out. On the SS-4 form, there is a date that the accounting period ends. I usually put December on that. Let me go back to that real quick and I'll show you guys. But it didn't ask for it this last time when I was filling out the online application. But so like the top part, the legal name is the trust, the trustee is whoever's acting as trustee, the responsible party and their social security number. Then down here, you've got you mark that it's a trust and the trust maker's tax ID number. Reason for applying is created a trust and an irrevocable trust. Closing account month is December. Date business started, that is that date of death of that second one. I usually put number of employees as 0 across the board. And then there on number 16, other, I just say trust administration and no specific product being provided. And down here at number 18, it says, has the entity ever applied for an EIN before? In most of these cases, it will be no. And so you want to make sure that if there is somebody that has previously obtained an EIN and now we're changing who the trustee is, you do need to give notification to the IRS within 60 days that trustee has changed and notify them. It kind of stinks when people will get an EIN and then they lose it and then they're not sure what it is anymore and they don't have any documentation and they try to get a second one. It can cause a little bit of problems. Sometimes we have it where the handoff from one trustee to another and they don't remember where that paperwork is, and so we have to say, yes, one has been applied for before, but nobody knows what is happening with it or where to find it. And so you have to go through the slow snail mail process of reaching out to the IRS and trying to see if you can get that information. So it's definitely one of those things that it seems like it's easy enough, but it is pretty important. And so as part of our trust administration services, that's something that we would obtain for you. But if you're doing it on your own and you want to try to apply for this on your own, these are the steps. So hopefully I've helped some of you today, and you're able to, go forward if you need this, or you just at least have the information on what it looks like after you and your spouse or you pass away, and how easy or difficult it is for your successor trustee to obtain this information. I spoke with somebody earlier this morning, and he was trying to take over his trust as trustee for his mom. He's named as the successor trustee, and mom doesn't want to do it anymore. And he went to the bank with the documents, and he said, the bank won't take your trust documents. And I said, well, help me understand what it is you're trying to do. And he's like, I wanted to be added as trustee. I said, well, the bank doesn't do that without specific documentation. So just know, sometimes it can be frustrating for those of you trying to execute on certain things. You think, I've got the tax ID number, the trust says I'm the successor trustee, but the banks are looking for specific information. They're looking for a certification of trust that has what happened to the trust maker. Why are you now acting as trustee? There's some different steps that go on when we're adding somebody as a trustee, whether the trust maker is appointing you as a co-trustee immediately, whether they are incapacitated, in which case we have to show some documentation from a healthcare provider that says that they can't make financial decisions, or if they've passed away. And they want those things in a notarized document with what the tax ID number is, what the new title to the trust is. And so they're looking for some specific documentation. They aren't willing to decipher somebody's trust and figure out whether or not you have authority. So just know there are some things that, you can do on your own, but when you start to get frustrated because it's not going as smoothly as you want, that may be when you need to consult with a professional that can help you with getting the documentation that you need to make it go smoothly. Because having a trust is definitely a much smoother process, but if you don't understand how the trust works or the documentation that's needed to get from point A to point B, you're going to be frustrated. And the banks and financial institutions, most of those people aren't educated on this type of subject well enough to advise you how to do it, and they certainly aren't going to give you legal advice. So I caution you to be careful in doing some of these things. Yes, it's something that you can do. You want to make sure that you're doing it right. You want to make sure that you've got all the right information, and you also want to make sure you've got the authority to do it. So we really hope that you've enjoyed today's presentation. We hope that you'll join us for future presentations. If anybody else has any questions, I'm happy to stick around for a few minutes and answer those. But otherwise, that is my presentation on how you apply for an EIN number or employer identification number after your trust makers have passed away. So thank you guys so much. I appreciate your time. Thank you, Susan. Appreciate your time. Appreciate you guys hanging out with us, and we look forward to future presentations. If anybody has any suggestions for any future presentations, please feel free to reach out to us. Alexis, I think we have an email address called info@keystonelawfirm.com, where you could send us your suggestions for future webinars. We'll be try to do about one a month, each one of us. And so if there's anything that you are thinking that you might want in terms of information, please let us know, because we'd be happy to consider it. Otherwise, thank you so much for your time today. It was great seeing you all, and we hope you have a fabulous day. I think Alexis is going to put an email address in there for me for any of you that have suggestions. Thank you. Yes, info@keystonelawfirm.com. Thanks, everybody, for your time today. This presentation will be available on our YouTube channel probably in about 2 weeks. So if you want to go back and review and slow it down and blow it up and do all those things, you should be able to do that in a couple weeks. Thanks again for your time today. We'll see you later. Bye.